Hey everybody, I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold here with our weekly lecture series. We've moved the series to Wednesdays, confusing the audience. Tonight's lecture is on former world chess champion Mikhail Botvinnik. And I'd like to thank our sponsor, Max Aronin. If you'd like to sponsor a lecture, then contact Karen. Her name and information is on the screen right now. If you're watching on YouTube, if you're watching live, then I just confused you. And we can have a lecture about whatever topic interests you. Botvinnik was born in 1911, passed away in 1995. Was five-time world champion, and he had three different reigns of his world championship because Botvinnik, unusually for a world champion, when he wasn't world champion, he won matches that he played, and when he was the world champion, he did not. So he won, lost, and drew world championship matches, but he never was the reigning champion and then won a match to maintain his title. He would lose his title, then win it back, or he would tie the match and retain his title, but he would never win those matches. So he was first among equals, as we like to say. He's also an electric engineer and computer scientist and was a pioneer in computer chess. The first world-class player to develop within the Soviet Union, it says. I'm not sure Jagorin agrees with that. His pupils included Karpov, Kasparov, and Kramnik. So I guess if your name starts with K, you could be a pupil of Botvinnik. Anyway, I like to say you can tell how good a chess player is by how long their Wikipedia page is. My Wikipedia page is not very long. Conversely, Botvinnik's Wikipedia page, if I wanted to read it all, that would take up the whole lecture time. They talk about early years, before he played chess, how he grew up, his parents, talk about entering junior tournaments and playing in Soviet championships and winning them. He won his first Soviet championship when he was only 20, which I guess now 20 is old, but back then it was young. And while he was doing that, he was getting degrees in electrical engineering and doing all kinds of technical work at different places, getting different degrees. And they show some pictures of Botvinnik throughout the years. It's a picture of him playing Lasker in 1936, picture of him playing Levenfish in 1937. Pictures all over from the 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s. And Botvinnik basically retired in the early 70s, didn't play chess the last 20 years of his life, but he was still involved in chess. Anyway, Botvinnik was the first person to become world champion, not due to a match. Alekhine was the world champion in the 40s and passed away, and there was no world champion since the world champion passed away. So they had a tournament that was a quadruple round robin with the top players in the world, which Botvinnik won and thus became the world champion. And Wikipedia page is pretty nice. It has lots of information about chess, about non-chess, lots of blurbs from games, lots of pictures of Botvinnik throughout the years, talks about his other achievements in electrical engineering as well as computer chess. He was a pioneer for computer chess in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. He was already working on computer chess and algorithms and things. Also of note is, I'm going to highlight it in blue here. These are writings that he did, mainly chess books, that were published between 1960 and 2004. And also writings on computer chess. There's also a list of tournament results, which is quite extensive, starting in 1923 and dozens of tournaments, and finishing in 1970 when he played in a tournament and tied for third when he was already almost 60 years old. He played a lot of matches with a lot of strong players. He played world championship matches with Bronstein, Smyslov, Tal, and Petrosian. And you can see his results here. Also played matches with Levenfish, Floor, Ragozin, Taimanov. And they have a list of his notable games. Some of them I decided were appropriate for the lecture. And you can learn a lot about Botvinnik just by reading this article and, of course, studying his games. Botvinnik was considered a strategic master, bringing strategy into chess as well as opening preparation. Before him, deep strategic thinking and deep opening prep weren't commonplace. And Botvinnik has a lot of variations and openings named after him, including the Botvinnik variation of the Semislav, of which we are going to look at a game played in that line in this lecture. He also had the Soviet school of chess. A lot of his pupils were later become famous players, such as the aforementioned Kramnik, Kasparov, and Karpov. There was also Shirov, Akopian, Elvest, and many other grandmasters they didn't mention because I guess they weren't considered strong enough for the article. Botvinnik was like a towering figure in chess. It was like Botvinnik was in the room. That's when you knew, that chess had entered the room. And one of the things that Botvinnik did better than anybody was win gold medals for the Soviet team in the 50s and 60s. He played in 6 Olympiads, and the Soviet team won all 6 Olympiads. He won gold medals on board 1, scoring lots of points on board 1. He also played board 2 behind Tal, since Tal was the world champion, winning the board 2 gold medal, and so forth. Overall in the Olympiads, he scored 75% total in all the Olympiads he played. Okay, let's look at some of his games. Talk about Botvinnik forever, but okay, first game was played in 1968 when Botvinnik was 57 years old against Lajos Portisch. And this is an astounding game where Botvinnik plays very tactically. And I guess for a lecture on a world champion who's basically beaten everybody and won many games, I think for interest of the viewer, we're going to need to see some brilliant games, some games that stand out amongst his other strategical victories. So this is against Portisch in Monte Carlo, 1968. Lajos Portisch, also great player of the past. Botvinnik did a lot to popularize the English opening for white, played it very often, c4 on move 1, and usually played g3 soon thereafter, as he did this game. Okay, they played a main line, which even could be played today. Very common line. It's a reverse Sicilian, actually, now. White wants to either take on b6 or play knight c5. So Portisch trades knights. Bishop d5. Rook f to c1. Very standard play. Black is very close to equality. Rook e8. Botvinnik doubles rooks on the c-file. And in this position, even though opening just ended and the middle game is starting, Portisch already makes the decisive mistake. He plays for tricks, but since this was 1968, Portisch didn't know tricks are for kids. He played the move knight b8, and purpose of this move is either to play c6 or bishop c6 and reroute the knight via d7. And this move gives black a terrible position based on, reasonable miscalculation. I could see many strong grandmasters not analyzing this properly, although a lot of them wouldn't play knight b8 on principle because it looks so silly. So Botvinnik captured the poison pawn, or so Portisch thought. Then bishop c6 attacks the queen and attacks the rook, and it looks like white's going to lose material. And that's why Portisch played this line, thinking that white couldn't play rook takes c7. Botvinnik always sacrificed the exchange, which he's forced to do now. Rook takes c6. Now, if you take with the knight, at the very least, white can take on b7, and white has 2 pawns for the sacrificed exchange. Black has an isolated pawn, and white's totally dominating the white squares. And this position is already bad for black. But Portisch thought he could just take with the pawn, and the white rook is still sort of semi-trapped, and black has an exchange up for a pawn. White didn't win the b7 pawn. b7 pawn's on c6 now. Now, Botvinnik played the move that he must have foreseen when he played rook takes c7. He took the other c pawn, rook takes f7. And obviously, if black doesn't take the rook, then white's doing fine. However, if black does take the rook, he's losing pretty quickly. So if you take the rook, I play queen c4 check. Now, the king has 3 squares to move to, as I highlighted, and the rook can also block. If the rook blocks, I play knight g5 check, so that's out of the question. If your king goes to e7 or to f6, it doesn't matter which one, then bishop g5 check wins the queen. So the only move to analyze seriously is king g6. Black can also play queen d5, and then after knight g5 check, we have a discovered attack on the queen. So king g6 looks like black's up a lot of material because black's up a lot of material. Okay, now we play queen g4 check. Again, king f6 loses the queen, so that's not good. So king f7. Now we play knight g5 check. And if the king tries to hide on g8, then we have queen c4 check, and black's going to get checkmated in the corner. We don't even have to sacrifice our queen. We just play queen g8 checkmate. Although it could be a smothered mate if black could take the queen. And king e7 runs into queen e6 checkmate. And king f6 loses to queen f5 check, king e7, bishop d6 check. And actually, not only is white winning the queen, but white can actually give checkmate somehow. Although, I don't see how with the king going to c7, but I do see white winning all of black's pieces. And then takes this. Terrible. Okay. And white has other ways to win also. Okay. So basically, you can't take the rook, which Botvinnik must have figured out when he played rook takes c7, that after bishop c6 takes, he could play rook takes, and king takes would be losing. And this is an excellent calculation from somebody who's at the very end of their career. Botvinnik's strengths were typically in the late 40s, 50s, and early 60s. This is already the late 60s when he's in his late 50s. So he's not, one of the top 10 players in the world in 1968, but he was world champion just a few years before. Okay, Portisch played h6, stopping all that knight g5 and bishop g5 nonsense and all those variations we were looking at. Rook to b7. Now, white has 2 pawns for the exchange, and black has 3 isolated pawns. and white has a rook on the 7th rank. But the fireworks aren't over. Queen c8 attacking the rook. Queen c4 check. Knight h4, sacking the rook again. And Portisch is like, all right, I'll take the rook. So black is up a lot of material here. Black has 2 rooks for a bishop. That's a lot of material. And Botvinnik continues the attack. Knight g6 check, only legal move. Bishop e4. And black's king is trapped, and white's going to do some kind of discovered double, triple checks, winning lots of material and forming a mating net against black's king. He played bishop to d6, saving his bishop. Knight takes e5, discovered check. g6. If he plays king g8, I can play knight f7 check. And then if I don't see a way to mate you, I can play knight takes d6 check and win your queen, which is even better than mate. Then you get to mate him later. Okay, so he played g6, bishop g6 check, king g7. Now it looks like white's all out of checks. Confusing air supply, because they thought they were all out of love, but they're all out of checks. However, there is a winning check in this position that I'm sure Botvinnik saw a few moves ago, and that's bishop takes h6 check, because Botvinnik hasn't sacrificed enough pieces yet. So if somebody can beat Portisch when they're 57 years old in such devastating fashion, you know they were one of the greatest players of all time. And in this position, Portisch resigned. If he doesn't resign and plays, let's say king takes the bishop, queen h4 check, queen h7 check, I guess I can save my knight. I don't have to save my knight, but why not? Knight g4 check, and then queen takes queen, and white is up so many pawns that I can't count that high. White's up 5 pawns, and black's king is also in a mating net. If we play king to f6 instead of taking the bishop, I'm sure there's more than one way to win. I can play queen f4 check, bishop f7 check, and this looks tough. I guess king e7, bishop g5 check, or I guess queen g5 is mate. Surprisingly, with 4 white pieces attacking the black king and black having no defensive pieces, he's checkmated. Amazing. Okay, so everything leads to checkmate or disastrous loss of material, so black resigned. Another way to lose all your pieces, if you enjoy doing that, is king h8, check, check, discover check on the king, and then knight takes queen. Probably white has checkmate there, which I didn't play because I was too busy taking all of black's pieces. Okay, so instead of getting checkmated or losing all of his pieces, Portisch resigned. So that was an amazing game for somebody Botvinnik's age, and it sort of rivals Lasker, because when Lasker was in his late 50s, he was also a very strong player, which is very unusual. Currently, Vishy Anand is 55 years old, and lately he hasn't been playing games like this. This looks more like Anand in his 20s. Okay, next game is one of 2 games we're going to show against Paul Keres, also a great player of the past. This game was played in the Soviet Team Championship in Moscow in 1966. Botvinnik was white. Played in English again. And remember in the previous game with Portisch, which was played later, white played g3. Botvinnik plays knight f3 here. Then g3, bishop c5, and Botvinnik takes the pawn on e5, playing for the fork trick. After knight takes, we play d4, forking the bishop and the knight, getting our piece back. So Keres instead played a desperado. He took on f2 with check. typically giving up the bishops and giving up the center isn't good for black. This is no exception. If I was white, I would consider d4, but I guess the c pawn is actually hanging. Unusual that you see the c pawn attack so early. So he played e4, wants to play d4, but first he defends his pawn with his bishop. So if it was white to move, white would play d4 with crushing position. So black played c5, and they just developed their pieces and made solid play. Eventually, white got the king to g2 like a normal square, and they had this positional strategic confrontation where it's knights versus bishops. It seems like black is okay with his knight on e5. Botvinnik played b4 to open up the queen side, and black doesn't want to get rid of the c pawn because that stops white from playing d4. So now white plays knight d5, putting tremendous pressure on b4, and more importantly, white wants to play d4 next move and totally dominate the center. So Keres solidified his queenside pawns with b6. And players just got their pieces to normal positions. Looks like white castled now. If you just entered the lecture, you'll think that white just castled. Everybody has good knights. Never play f6. Now you know the result of the game. Okay, and this position reminds me of a famous Simpsons joke from the first full episode where they ask Bart to name like an oxymoron or something that goes against itself. And he said, well, you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And this position reminds me of that because I know what happened in the rest of the game. Even though white moved the king a lot, the king is very safe on h2. I don't see a way black could ever attack white's king. White's king on h2 is unassailable. Conversely, I don't know what to do with my king on e8. Should I just leave it on e8? Should I castle kingside? Should I insanely try to castle queenside? And castling kingside looks bad because your h4 pawn is hanging. On the other hand, leaving your king on e8 means that white's going to play g5, and king on e8 is no good. We're attacking on the f file. White has tremendous pressure on the pawn on f6. If black doesn't castle, where's black's rook's going to go? Okay, so black's position's very tough to play here because it's not clear what he should do to improve his position or make his king safe. Keres played rook a7, and he was ready for g5. His rook's going to defend along the second rank. And Botvinnik played g5. So the idea is we can take now, excuse me, which he didn't do because now queen f7 runs into rook takes queen. So Botvinnik wanted to open that f file and was ready to sack a pawn. It's also a clearance sacrifice because now Botvinnik can play bishop g4, which he couldn't do before, and white's pieces are all just amazingly good, and black's king is terrible. So g5 is a very complex pawn sacrifice. Keres castled, and he said, you know what? If you take my pawn, then I'll take on g5, and the black king is relatively safe. We're gaining a tempo on the queen. My rook can go to f7. My knight can go to f4 later. Black's pieces are reasonably placed, and this is okay for black. And Botvinnik didn't want to trade pawns. He wanted to checkmate Keres, so he played g6. And Botvinnik said, I want to play queen takes h4, queen h7 mate. That looks pretty simple. Okay, so Keres made the only move to defend the h4 pawn, f5. Defending his h4 pawn, and now his rook is opposite Botvinnik's queen. So if Keres had the move, he could take on e4 and probably be winning. So now it looks like everything is fine for black. And problem is, black resigned on the next move, confusing the audience. And again, Botvinnik is in his 50s, and he's playing this strategic masterpiece, and he plays a brilliant final move. You may have noticed white really wants to play queen takes h4 because queen h7's mate. And if I play queen takes h4, I'm winning. But your queen's on d8 defending h4. If only there was a way to kick the queen off of d8. As I give the answer away with my trash talk. And Botvinnik said, "You will know my name is the Lord when I play rook b8." So for somebody in his 50s, Botvinnik sure plays aggressive sacrificial chess. Now, the queen doesn't have any squares to stay on the pawn on h4 because white's defending all of them. And we can't block the rook. I can't put something on c8, although if I could, then white would take it. And I can't let white play rook takes queen because then I would lose. And if I take the rook, my final gasp, queen takes h4, white's threatening queen h7 mate. Problem is, if we move our rook so our king has f8, we're still getting mated because the knight defends e7. So what black needs to do is to make two moves. Black needs to take the knight and then move the rook away. But if black takes the knight, white doesn't recapture, white just plays checkmate. And if black moves the rook away, then my knight is still there. So I have queen h8 checkmate. The knight is defending e7. If you play knight g5, stopping queen h7 mate, I just take it. And queen b2 check stops mate via the horizon effect, but rook f2 or king h1 leaves black without any further delay of the queen h7 mate. So after rook b8, Keres resigned. So really nice strategical game where white finished off with a mating attack. The mating attack finished with a move on the queen side away from the black king, nowhere near the black king, but distracting the queen on d8 from the pawn on h4. You can tell just by looking at two games he played in his 50s how strong he was and what a strong world champion he was. Okay, this was a famous match between the Soviet Union and the USA in 1945. They played a radio match where they sent moves over telex or telegram, whatever they did back then, to send moves to each other, and they played chess. And board one was Botvinnik versus Denker. Denker's U.S. champion at some points, and another great player of the past. And I've actually met Arnold Denker, and I've actually seen Portisch. I never played Portisch, but I played his brother, and his brother crushed me. So I can't even beat Portisch's brother. Okay, so Denker has white, so we'll flip the board. And this is the game that really makes the lecture because Botvinnik plays the Botvinnik variation. That's when you know you're in trouble. And in 1988, I was playing in a tournament in Ostend, Belgium, and I had prep for this line in this double king pawn opening. And I played my prep, and my opponent outplayed me after that and beat me. And then I went back to my prep, I opened up some informant, and I was like, what did I do wrong? Where could I have played better? Because in the game I saw, my side did okay. And it turned out the opponent in the informant, the game that I had like tried to memorize, that was the guy that I played in Ostend. So when you get good enough in chess, sometimes you play people who are famous for the openings that you've prepared, but you got to get really good. So if you're playing like a 1400, it's opening's not named after him. But if you become one of the top players in the world, sometimes you get to play Botvinnik and he plays the Botvinnik against you. Then, what are you supposed to do? Okay, so they played Queen's Gambit Semi-Slav. And this is called the Botvinnik variation. And here's Botvinnik playing it. And I've had white and black in this position. Now, this is 1945. So modern theory from the 2010s and 20s doesn't apply yet. But this is still the way that they play. This is still theory. You'll see this game in Grandmaster games today. And in this position, everybody plays G3. So every modern game since 1970, white plays G3. And there's tons and tons and tons of theory. Sometimes the theory doesn't end until move 30 or 35. And one of my great feats of preparation was I prepared the white side of this against whoever I was going to be playing, and I played somebody within 2 months, and they went into my preparation, and I prepared virtually the whole game. And by the time I was out of my prep, I was already winning, and I won the game. And they said they're never playing the opening again. That was good prep. Okay, Denker didn't play G3. This was 1945, and we're like, I move 15 here, so, not playing 15, 20 moves of theory in the 1940s. And white played bishop E2, which is considered innocuous, not giving white an advantage. Black played queen B6, which is the main move against G3. Castles, castles. And typically we see this position with a white bishop on G2. A4, B4, very logical, and C5. And very complex, complicated position. Theory nowadays doesn't like when white plays A4 too early, because sometimes when the pawn's on B4, we want to play A3 and take the pawn on B4 and open up the line for the rook. So A4 and bishop E2, those moves aren't played nowadays, probably because of games like this. Okay, white played queen B1, white's knight was attacked, so white defended his knight. Seems like a good idea. Now, you'll notice when black plays B4, he's undefending his C4 pawn. So if white decides, hey, I'm going to defend my knight by making a normal looking move, now the C4 pawn's not attacked. So white takes this or black takes on D4, I should say, and black's game looks great. Knight E5's coming. God damn. Okay, so Denker played queen B1, defending his knight, and after queen C7, threatening checkmate, white is later able to play bishop takes C4. First, we have to stop checkmate, so he played knight G3. I've never seen a knight on G3 in this variation, because white always plays G3. So I'm already confused. C takes D4. Denker takes the pawn. If Botvinnik takes, then Denker can win his queen. So Botvinnik plays queen C6, threatening queen takes G2 mate. Not a lot of defenses to that. So he played F3, never play F3. Although it does stop mate in 1. So has some good qualities. D3, what is the point of D3? It opens up this diagonal to the white king because white just played F3. Now, black's going to play bishop C5 check or queen C5 check, force the king into the corner, then we're going to try to checkmate him in the corner. And by try to checkmate him, that's what he did. So he played queen C1, defending his bishop. Bishop C5 check. He put it in H. And now Botvinnik said, excuse me, in several decades, Grandmaster Finegold's going to do a lecture on me, so I have to play moves like this. so people enjoy the lecture. That's exactly what Botvinnik said. Queen d6, very serious threats here on the diagonal. We're threatening queen takes knight, winning the game immediately. Queen f4. And now Botvinnik played the brilliant rook takes h2 check. Denker thought he was going to trade queens and go into an ending, an unusual endgame, but white's king is trapped in the corner. King takes, rook h8 check. Now, the bishop on c5 is controlling g1, so white has many ways to lose all of his pieces. For example, the funniest way is knight h5, check, king g3, and then I take this with check because your queen's pinned. And then I win your queen. Although, maybe I have mate. Maybe I should play, oh, I don't have another rook. Okay, so I'll play here and I'll have mate later. And white has no pieces left. Okay, another move is bishop h6, but then when I take your queen, your bishop's pinned, so you can't take back. So he played queen h4. That's the best move. Now white's up a queen for just a rook, not even a rook and a piece. Then queen f4 forks the bishops and threatens queen takes h4 checkmate. So white is down a queen. Oh no, I'm sorry. It's not a queen for a rook. It's a queen for two rooks because black doesn't have any rooks. Black sacrificed all of his rooks. But now Botvinnik is threatening queen h4 mate and queen takes c4. And to be perfectly honest, there's not a lot of defenses to either one. I guess if I was white and I chose not to resign, I would play king h3. And then queen takes c4. Black's up a piece. Black has a pass d pawn on the 6th rank. And white's bishop is just terrible. Black's pieces are pretty good. So Botvinnik won, Denker resigned. And Botvinnik won a famous game in the Botvinnik Semi-Slav, which he should do. His name's Botvinnik. And it was games like this where people named the opening after Botvinnik. He was the one that popularized it for black. Okay, this is another game against Paul Keres. Botvinnik again has the black pieces just like the last game. And Botvinnik and Keres played Nimzo Indian. And Keres did something that scares me because sometimes I almost do things like this and then I think about this game. This is a game I knew before we had the sponsor of the lecture. And since I play the Queen C2 Nimzo Indian, I make sure that I don't play this way with white. Now, if you're squeamish, you have to look away because white does something here that's too risky. But this was 1941, the Soviet Absolute Championship. So in 41, this wasn't considered too risky, but it is now. He castled queenside. And sometimes I castle queenside in the Nimzo Indian, and sometimes I regret it. And I try not to get positions like Keres got in this game. Botvinnik went on the attack right away. He took on c3 because the knight's not pinned anymore. Then he played g5, unpinning his knight. Then he took on d4, attacking the queen. Then he attacked the queen again. Every move, Botvinnik is attacking something. And then he played bishop f5, stopping the white king from running away to the corner. So now, black's going to play rook c8 and castle, and white's king is in a lot of trouble. And after this game, nobody played this way with white anymore. It was too easy for Botvinnik to get a crushing position. Rook c8, bishop d3, queen d7, getting all of his pieces out. Now, not only is he defending his bishop, but simultaneously, black is threatening to win white's queen. Black can move the knight away with check, discovered check, and then the white queen is hanging. So white has to do something about that. So white played king b1, always play king b1. Trade, queen f5. Now we have to be careful on how we defend the rook because black can play knight b4. So for example, queen d1, knight b4. So I don't have a lot of help for white here. If you play queen b3, I can still play knight b4. You're not helping yourself here. Okay, so he played e4, which saves his rook. Knight takes e4, threatening everything. Every move for black is a threat. Knight takes wins, knight takes wins, knight d2 wins, knight c3 check wins, knight c5 wins. And black is a pawn ahead, and white hasn't developed yet. And this is Paul Keres, one of the top 10 players in the world. King a1 in the corner. Black finally castled. b5, sacrificing a pawn. Knight d4. If you take the knight, you get back rank checkmated. So he played queen d3. Knight c2 check. King b1, obviously. And knight b4. And that's it. Here Keres resigned. If he doesn't resign, he could get mated in a cute way. Although black doesn't have to mate white. Black can take all of white's pieces. That's why people resign when your opponent has a choice of mating you or taking all your pieces. Sometimes you resign so they don't do either one. But a funny variation to save your queen is, let's say, queen f3, knight d2 double check. Now I could take the queen, obviously, or I could play knight c2 checkmate, or I could sacrifice my queen for no reason and then play knight c2 mate, just because it's cuter. Okay, but everything completely wins for black, so white resigned after knight b4. I mean, a total crush of Keres, and that was the end of that line. Nobody plays castles anymore with white in that position. It was too crushing. Okay, and last but not least is Botvinnik's most famous game, maybe ever. His game he beat Capablanca at AVRO 1938, one of the strongest tournaments ever. Capablanca was way past his prime, and Botvinnik was just coming into his own. Botvinnik wasn't Botvinnik yet, and Capablanca wasn't Capablanca anymore. But Botvinnik was pretty good in 38. Okay, they played also a Nimzo Indian. Botvinnik liked to play this way with white, and sometimes Botvinnik would play rook a2 and get his rook over to the king side. Not this game, but that was one of his ideas. This game actually looks like a game Anand played Carlsen in their World Championship match, where Anand blundered on the last move and resigned. This looks like the same kind of position. So eventually black played c4. And now white can go to work on the center. White can play rook e1, knight g3, f3, e4. Typical Botvinnik way of playing. And black's going to play on the queen side. So he remaneuvered his knight to go to b3, which is what Carlsen did. And this way, Capablanca can take the a-pawn and push his queenside pawns. Botvinnik sacrificed his a-pawn and said, I'm playing in the center. Okay, and now, if Botvinnik has his druthers, he'll play f5 and win the game, because white's kingside attack is irresistible. Capablanca played f5 first, trying to block it up. And if white doesn't take on Passant, black will eventually play knight f8, knight e6, and blockade. And black has a passed a-pawn and a big pawn majority on the queen side. And white's bishop on b2 isn't so good. Botvinnik took on Passant to open up the black king. f5, let's get that king. Capablanca trades. He says, if we trade all the pieces, you won't mate me. Botvinnik plays the collinear move, rook e6, attacking the knight. The knight can't move away because the knight's defending the rook. So he trades rooks. Now his knight's attacked again. Once again, the knight can't move away because queen f7 check is too strong. So king g7. Now white's a pawn ahead, and they've traded all the rooks. So it looks like black is doing a good job defending. Queen f4. Queen goes back to e8. Queen e5, pinning the knight, defending the e6 pawn, and then queen e7. And in this position, Botvinnik played one of the most famous combinations in all of chess history. That's why I saved this game for last. This position, many of you on YouTube have seen before because it's such a famous position. Because the players were world champions and because what Botvinnik did was brilliant. It looks like Capablanca has stopped everything. Every move that white can make where you go forward, well, black stopped that. The knight can't go anywhere here because we take it. The bishop can't go here because we take it. The queen's pinning the knight and defending the pawn. That's about as good as the queen can do. So it looks like eventually black's going to be doing great. Black's a pawn up. Black has a passed a pawn. Black's knight can come back in the center. Eventually, black can try to win this pawn. And it looks like white is stymied. But then Botvinnik, who must have seen this when he played rook e6, played the brilliant bishop a3, attacking the queen, sacrificing his bishop. And after taking the bishop, he then sacrifices his knight with knight h5 check. And Botvinnik had to see this in advance. Otherwise, white's position doesn't make any sense. Well, you can't take with the knight's pinned. I can try to take with the knight, but the computer won't let me because of the pin. So he takes with the pawn, queen g5 check. And you can't play king e8 because check and checkmate. So you have to play king g8. e7, threatening to promote with mate, and queen f8 mate. And Botvinnik had to foresee that black doesn't have perpetual here because it looks like black has perpetual. Check, check, and Botvinnik walks his king up the board. First he takes the h-pawn. He can't play g4 because queen g4 is mate. So he takes the h-pawn, then he plays g4 later. And then he gets checked again, king h5, and that's the end of the checks. And now white's threatening queen f8 mate, and Capablanca stopped it by resigning. Now there's nothing to play for black. So that was one of the most brilliant games ever in one of the most famous tournaments ever with two of the most famous chess players ever, ending with a double piece sacrifice, a king march, avoiding perpetual check, and then Botvinnik won. So a brilliant game between Botvinnik and Capablanca. And Botvinnik was a great world champion. He played many world championship matches. He was a strong person outside of chess, other interests. He was strong in computer chess. The Botvinnik Chess School saw lots of future grandmasters and world champions enter the Botvinnik School. So he was a big force in chess, one of the most famous chess players of all time, and one of the greatest. Certainly one of the top 10 or 15 players of all time. I'm Grandmaster Ben Finegold. I want to thank Max Aronin again for sponsoring the lecture. Please like and subscribe and leave a comment, and I'll see you guys next time with more weekly lectures. Great players of the past, Botvinnik. Bye, everybody.